A winter storm knocks out the power in your neighborhood. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. Your phone still has battery. The food in your refrigerator is still cold. You light a candle, wrap yourself in a blanket, and tell yourself everything will be back to normal by morning. But morning comes. The heater is still silent. The lights stay off. The temperature inside your home drops a little more. Then another day passes. And another. The supermarket shelves begin to empty. Roads disappear beneath snow. The cold slowly finds its way through every layer of clothing you own. Now imagine something even harder to believe. Imagine that winter is not going to end next week, not next month, not even in 3 months. Imagine living in a world where snow covers the ground for half the year. A world where every sunrise brings the same freezing wind. A world where finding enough food is a daily challenge. A world where a single mistake in the cold could threaten your family's survival. For thousands of years, this was not a disaster. It was simply life. Long before central heating, supermarkets, insulated homes, or weather forecasts, your ancestors faced winters that seemed endless. Yet somehow they survived. Not only did they survive, they raised children, built shelters, created tools, shared stories around glowing fires, and passed their knowledge on to the generations that would eventually become us. You might picture prehistoric people as primitive cave dwellers struggling against nature. But that image leaves out something important, because the real story is not about people who were weaker than us. In many ways, it is about people who had to become stronger, more inventive, and more adaptable than most of us could imagine. So what was life really like when winter lasted for months? How did people stay warm when temperatures plunged far below freezing? What did they eat when plants vanished beneath ice and snow? How did children survive? And what secrets allowed human beings to endure some of the harshest seasons our species has ever faced? To answer those questions, you have to leave the modern world behind. The snow is falling, the wind is rising, and a very long winter is about to begin. If you grew up watching movies about prehistoric humans, you were probably shown the same image again and again. A small group of people huddled deep inside a dark cave, a fire flickering in the corner, snow falling outside, and for generations, that image shaped the way many people imagined life during long winters. It seems logical. After all, if winter lasted for months, wouldn't a cave be the perfect place to survive? Solid rock, protection from wind, a ready-made shelter. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Archaeologists have discovered that many Ice Age people did not spend their entire lives hiding in caves. In fact, some groups lived far from caves altogether. Across the frozen plains of Europe and Asia, humans built shelters in places where no cave existed. They constructed homes from wood, animal hides, and sometimes even the bones of mammoths. Imagine standing on a vast snowy landscape with no mountain nearby, no permanent buildings, and temperatures far below freezing. Instead of searching endlessly for a cave, your ancestors often created their own homes. And surprisingly, some of those shelters may have been better suited to survival than caves themselves. A cave could protect you from wind, but it could also be damp, dark, and difficult to heat. Smoke from a fire could linger inside. Water could seep through cracks. Some caves were occupied only seasonally rather than year-round. The real goal was not simply finding shelter. It was creating a space that conserved precious body heat. And that required something much more important than rock walls. It required knowledge of weather, knowledge of materials, knowledge passed from one generation to the next. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about prehistoric humans. People often imagine survival as a contest of strength. The strongest hunter survives. The toughest individual survives. But during a winter that lasted for months, strength alone was never enough. A powerful person could still freeze. A fast runner could still starve. What truly mattered was information. Knowing where animals migrated, knowing how to store food, knowing how to build a shelter that trapped heat, knowing when to move and when to stay. In many ways, survival during a long winter was less about muscles and more about problem solving. And that leads to a much bigger question. If winter stretched across half the year, what was the greatest threat your ancestors actually faced? Was it the cold itself, the snow, predators, or was there another danger hiding beneath all of them? To understand that, you have to look at the challenge that controlled nearly every decision they made. A challenge so important that failing to solve it could wipe out an entire group before spring ever arrived. That challenge was not the cold. At least, not directly. The cold was dangerous. There is no question about that. It could numb your fingers, freeze exposed skin, and drain precious energy from your body. But cold alone was rarely the true enemy. The real threat was something much simpler. Food, or more specifically, the lack of it. Imagine stepping outside on a winter morning. The landscape stretches endlessly before you. White, silent, frozen, beautiful from a distance. But beneath that blanket of snow lies a problem. Almost nothing is growing. The berries are gone, the edible roots are buried, the insects have disappeared, and many animals have migrated elsewhere. In the modern world, winter mostly changes what you wear. In the Ice Age, winter changed what you could eat, and if winter lasted for months, every meal became part of a much larger equation. Your body is constantly burning energy just to stay warm, even while resting, even while sleeping. Every breath of cold air costs calories. Every hour spent walking through snow costs calories. Every attempt to hunt costs calories. The colder the world became, the more fuel your body demanded. Yet at the exact moment your energy needs increased, food became harder to find. This created a survival trap. To find food, you needed energy. But to get energy, you needed food. And if that balance tipped in the wrong direction, the consequences could be devastating. A failed hunt was not simply a disappointing day. It could mean an entire family eating less that night. Several failed hunts in a row could threaten an entire community. This is why many scientists believe food security was one of the most important challenges faced by Ice Age humans. Not because food was always absent, but because uncertainty was constant. You never knew exactly when the next successful hunt would happen. You never knew whether migrating herds would follow their usual routes. You never knew whether a sudden storm would keep you trapped for days. In many ways, surviving a long winter was not about finding food once. It was about finding food again and again and again, and doing so for months. But there was another problem hidden inside this one. Even when animals could be found, reaching them was far from easy. Picture yourself tracking a herd across a frozen plain. The wind is pushing against you. Snow crunches beneath your feet. The temperature keeps falling. Every mile you travel burns more energy. Every hour away from shelter increases risk. And unlike modern hunters, you cannot simply return home to a heated house at the end of the day. Everything depends on the outcome. The hunt is not a sport. It is not recreation. It is the thin line separating comfort from hardship. But here is what makes the story remarkable. Human beings did not survive these winters by becoming stronger than nature. They survived by becoming smarter. Instead of fighting the environment directly, they learned to work with it. They studied animal behavior. They memorized migration routes. They developed tools, strategies, and social systems that transformed impossible challenges into manageable ones. And this is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Because solving the food problem required much more than hunting skill. It required cooperation, planning, innovation, and a level of adaptability that helped shape the very species you are today. The question was no longer how to survive one freezing day. The question was how to survive an entire season that seemed as though it might never end. And the first solution began with something moving across the snowy horizon. A source of food, clothing, tools, and survival itself. The great herds. The great herds. If you could stand on an Ice Age plain and look toward the horizon, this might be the first thing that would catch your attention. Not trees, not villages, not roads, but animals, thousands of them, moving slowly across the frozen landscape like living rivers, reindeer, wild horses, bison, musk oxen, and in some regions, mammoths. For your ancestors, these animals were far more than food. They were survival itself. A single successful hunt could provide meat, fat, hides, bones, sinew, and fuel for weeks. But here is the challenge. The herds did not stay still, they moved. And if you wanted to survive the winter, you often had to move with them. Imagine trying to predict where thousands of animals would travel months in advance. There are no maps, no satellites, no forecasts, only observation and memory. You learn which valleys collect snow first. You learn which routes animals prefer during storms. You learn where rivers freeze safely and where the ice remains dangerous. Over generations, this knowledge becomes one of the most valuable resources a community possesses, and this is the first great solution, following the herds instead of waiting for food to come to you. But that was only the beginning. Because finding animals did not guarantee survival, you still had to preserve what you caught. Imagine finally bringing down a large animal after days of searching. For a brief moment, food is no longer the problem. Now a different problem appears. How do you stop it from spoiling? Today you have refrigerators and freezers. Your ancestors had something else, winter itself. The cold that threatened to kill them could also help save them. Frozen temperatures naturally preserved meat for long periods. Snow and ice became enormous outdoor freezers. In some regions, meat could remain edible far longer than it would during warmer seasons. What looks like an empty frozen wasteland was actually providing one of the most useful food storage systems in human history. But that is not what surprises researchers the most. The real surprise is how efficiently prehistoric people used almost every part of an animal. Meat provided calories, fat provided even more. Hides became clothing, bones became tools, tendons became cordage. Nothing valuable was wasted. When resources are uncertain, efficiency becomes a survival strategy. And that leads to the next solution. Because food alone could not keep you alive, you also had to stay warm. At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Build a bigger fire. Problem solved. But winter survival was far more complicated than that. A large fire burns through fuel quickly. Fuel requires labor. Labor requires calories. Calories require food. Everything is connected. This meant your ancestors could not simply create more heat. They had to learn how to keep heat from escaping. And this is where human ingenuity truly shines. Instead of relying entirely on fire, they transformed themselves into walking insulation systems. Animal hides were layered. Furs were selected carefully. Loose air pockets trapped warmth close to the body. Some clothing systems worked on principles remarkably similar to modern winter gear. The goal was not generating heat. The goal was keeping the heat your body already produced. A small difference in insulation could determine whether precious calories were conserved or wasted. But even excellent clothing had limits. Eventually, everyone needed shelter. And here the story becomes even more fascinating. Many people imagine Ice Age shelters as crude structures built out of necessity. Yet some archaeological discoveries tell a different story. Certain communities built surprisingly sophisticated homes, animal hides stretched over wooden frames, semi-subterranean dwellings partially dug into the ground, and in some famous locations, circular structures constructed using mammoth bones. These shelters were not random. They were carefully designed to reduce wind exposure and retain heat. A properly designed shelter could feel dramatically warmer than the world outside. Even a few degrees of difference mattered. When winter lasts for months, small advantages become life-saving advantages. But there was still another problem, perhaps the most difficult one of all, because surviving winter was not simply about food, or clothing, or shelter. It was about people. Imagine spending months in a confined space with the same small group. The storms continue outside, the days are short, the darkness feels endless. Resources are limited, tension becomes inevitable. A single argument can threaten cooperation, and cooperation is exactly what survival depends on. This is why many anthropologists believe one of humanity's great Ice Age adaptations was not a tool, not a weapon, not even fire. It was the ability to work together. Hunters shared information, families shared food, knowledge was passed to children, elders remembered migration routes from previous winters. Stories preserved lessons that could not be written down. The group became stronger than any individual, and perhaps that was humanity's greatest advantage. Mammoths were larger, bison were stronger, the cold was relentless, but humans possessed something different, the ability to pool knowledge across generations, to solve problems collectively, to prepare for a future that had not yet arrived. And this ability would become increasingly important as the winter stretched on, because staying alive was only one challenge. Remaining human through months of darkness was another entirely. And that is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Remaining human through months of darkness, that may sound like a strange challenge. After all, if you have enough food, warm clothing, and a safe shelter, haven't you already solved the problem? Not quite. Because human beings do not live on calories alone. Imagine spending months in a world where the landscape barely changes. The same snow, the same cold wind, the same frozen horizon. Day after day, week after week. For people living at high latitudes, winter could bring extremely short daylight hours. Sometimes the sun would barely climb above the horizon before disappearing again. The world would feel smaller, darker, more isolated. And this is where one of the most important connections between the Ice Age and modern life begins to emerge. Today, scientists know that long periods of darkness can affect mood, energy levels, sleep patterns, and mental well-being. Your ancestors may not have understood hormones or neuroscience, but they understood something equally important. People needed connection. People needed purpose. People needed reasons to keep going. This may explain why some of humanity's earliest artistic traditions flourished during harsh Ice Age environments. When archaeologists discover cave paintings, carved figurines, decorated tools, or personal ornaments, they are seeing more than art. They are seeing evidence of human minds refusing to surrender to the monotony of survival. Imagine sitting beside a fire while a winter storm howls outside. Children gather close, adults repair tools, elders begin telling stories. Stories about great hunts, stories about distant lands, stories about ancestors, stories that explain the world. In that moment, storytelling becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a survival technology, a way to preserve knowledge, a way to strengthen social bonds, a way to help people imagine a future beyond the current winter. And perhaps that sounds familiar, because even today, during difficult times, people still gather around stories. Only now the fire has become a television screen, a smartphone, a laptop. The technology changed. The human need did not. But there is another surprising connection between their world and yours. Think about your winter clothing. your insulated jacket, your thermal layers, your gloves, your waterproof boots. These may seem like modern inventions, yet the basic idea behind all of them is ancient. Thousands of years ago, people were already experimenting with layered clothing systems designed to trap heat and block wind. Your ancestors were among the first engineers of personal climate control. Now think about your house: double-pane windows, insulated walls, weatherproof roofs. Modern architecture spends enormous effort keeping warmth inside and cold outside. That goal would have been instantly recognizable to Ice Age builders. Whether using mammoth bones, wooden frames, animal hides, or partially underground shelters, they were solving the same problem. How do you create a pocket of warmth in a hostile environment? Even your freezer has an ancient parallel. Today, electricity preserves your food. For much of prehistory, winter itself often performed the same role. The frozen landscape became nature's refrigeration system. The more you look, the more familiar the Ice Age begins to feel. Not because life was easy, but because many of the solutions you rely on today are refined versions of ideas developed by countless generations before you. The tools evolved, the principles remained, and perhaps that is the most remarkable part of the story. When you turn on a heater, zip up a winter coat, store food for later, or gather with family during a cold evening, you are participating in behaviors shaped by a very long history of adaptation. The distance between your world and theirs is smaller than it first appears. The same species that sat around those fires is sitting here now. The same species that planned for winter is planning for tomorrow. The same species that learned to cooperate in the cold built the cities we live in today. And all of that raises one final question. What exactly did those endless winters leave behind? What permanent mark did they carve into the human story? Because the legacy of a long winter did not end when the snow melted. In many ways, it never ended at all. The snow eventually melted. The glaciers slowly retreated. The world changed. But the lessons humanity learned during those long winters remained, and they became part of us. When you look at human history, it is tempting to focus on inventions: the wheel, agriculture, cities, writing, computers. But before any of those things could exist, there was a more fundamental achievement: survival. Generation after generation, your ancestors faced environments that could be unforgiving, unpredictable, and relentlessly demanding. Those who adapted passed on their knowledge. Those who cooperated increased their chances of success. Those who planned ahead often survived where others struggled. Over thousands of years, these behaviors helped shape the human story, not because winter magically transformed people, but because harsh environments rewarded preparation, innovation, and social connection. Think about it for a moment. The ability to store resources for the future, the instinct to share information, the habit of teaching children, the desire to build communities. These are not modern ideas. They are ancient survival strategies. And perhaps that is why the story of a long winter feels surprisingly familiar. Even though you live in a world of electricity, supermarkets, and central heating, your brain was shaped by ancestors who spent countless winters solving problems that could not be ignored. When a storm approaches, you prepare. When resources seem uncertain, you save. When challenges arise, you seek advice from others. Much of what feels natural today has roots stretching deep into humanity's past. The people who endured those frozen months were not fundamentally different from you. They laughed, they worried, they cared about their children, they shared meals, they told stories. They hoped that tomorrow would be better than today. And perhaps that is the most important realization of all. The Ice Age was not populated by strangers. It was populated by people. People whose choices, sacrifices, and resilience helped make your life possible. Every warm home, every winter coat, every preserved meal, every story shared with family on a cold evening. All of these belong to a chain that stretches back much farther than most of us ever imagine. So the next time you step indoors after a freezing day, pause for a moment. Feel the warmth around you. Listen to the silence beyond the walls. And remember that warmth is not just a modern convenience. It is an inheritance passed down through countless generations who faced winters that lasted for months and refused to give up. Because the greatest lesson of those endless winters was never about snow, or ice, or cold. It was about adaptation, about cooperation, about the extraordinary ability of human beings to keep moving forward, even when the world around them seemed frozen. And perhaps that is why their story still matters today. Because every time humanity faces a challenge, we are drawing upon the same qualities that carried our ancestors through the longest winters of all. If you enjoyed this journey into humanity's distant past and want to explore more stories about survival, evolution, and the lives of our ancestors, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for the next adventure. Until then, stay curious. And if stories like this remind you that the modern world is built upon the struggles, discoveries, and resilience of countless generations before us, then you're in the right place. Here on Duck Psychology, we explore the hidden stories of human evolution, prehistoric life, ancient survival, and the fascinating psychology that helped shape our species. Every week, you'll discover new journeys into the Ice Age, archaeology, anthropology, and the remarkable adaptations that made us who we are today. So if you haven't already, take a moment to subscribe to Duck Psychology, turn on notifications, and join a growing community of curious minds exploring the deepest chapters of human history. Because the next story might change the way you see yourself. See you in the next video.